Hello all. How many have we got? Okay. So I don't know if many of you are familiar with Mind the Gaps and the London Underground. I guess many, it's not sort of such a local thing in the UK. And I thought about calling this and using this analogy of the public underground, because in the public underground you have always mind the gap where you may actually fall, and you can actually travel to some exciting places. And that's what I thought about looking at gaps into maps. And maybe if I give you a quick introduction about myself to start with. I work in the professional service business, and I quite like to put the CV in the map as well. And I'm testing this idea, and I was talking about it earlier, of looking how can we map ourselves at the bottom of the map, and the same with leadership, to see how we're serving effectively the needs of our clients and where we get brought into the value chains. So I work, as a mapper, or it's not so mainstream out there, but I quite like to have maps where I work, and some of the maps I'm presenting today are actually inspired by some of the work I do. I work as well as a leadership and team coach, and I work with flow and organization design for flow, and facilitate also Kaizen, which I think a lot of the continual improvement is actually a problem in industry. And for myself, I'm looking at basically productizing some of those offerings with clients, so that it's kind of crossing my chasm in a way. So I really live by maps, and look at my own development using maps. So if I get back to the talk, what's exciting about gaps is, and there's this story that is really interesting around in World War II. They were looking at how to reinforce planes, and looking at where the bullet holes were, and creating actually some reinforcement in those places. But was that actually the right place to look? Because those were the planes that were coming back. And should they have looked into the places where there weren't bullet holes, because the planes that were not coming back were probably hit in those spots? And thinking about that made me think in the same way, should we look at the gaps on maps? And if we were to look at traditional methods to map things, I believe they are starting to be obsolescent, in the sense that you don't spot those gaps, you don't spot the opportunities as well. And if I just take an example of using a BCG matrix for, let's say, for argument's sake, the rise of aggregators in insurance business, where we will represent that the insurance business as we know it, or underwriting, house insurance, motor insurance, and so on, is probably the cash cow. And then when we have some add-ons for them to actually make more money and margins, and maybe some digital channels to reach customers, and give some ease of signing up, and maybe actually some novel things they're trying around hyper segmentation, and for motor vehicles, maybe tracking journeys and doing more custom sort of offerings based on the behaviors of driving, the speeds, and so on. Or putting sensors into house to reduce the fires. So maybe people see things like that on a BCG matrix, but all those things are actually connected. And if we were talking the aggregators, so are you doing digital channels, or you not? All the aggregators replacing you, and you commoditizing self effectively. All this gets really confused on the BCG matrix. And actually, that's one of the one that sort of provides a better view of things. And I think that the many of those frameworks done in the 60s are actually pre-digital, and are not so appropriate for doing strategy right now. They're all useful in some ways, but not so appropriate. because they tend to look at a portfolio of products and the products obeying a cycle. And in digital, the strategy is really about what's the place in the value chain. And looking at your value chain is a way of enabling your strategy, so you may be able to to understand where we got some constraints and we not be able to achieve what we're set to achieve because of those constraints. So understanding that value chain will decide whether you can realize your strategy or not. But equally, sometimes the strategy is itself in the value chain, and it's not a new thing, it's a new product, a new offering. It's actually a play within the value chain. And Wardley Maps are really different because they bring that situational insight. So we look at that today, especially looking at the gaps and how to explore the gaps. So if I look at a typical map, and a lot of you are certainly familiar with that, and there's plenty of maps that have been sort of presented today. If I look at the map, generally you always start from users and user needs, and that's sort of also a design thinking type approach. But and the whole aspects of value in lean, all those things are based on user need. There's only a truth in the user and their needs. And then when you go cascades through a map, you tend to look at accessing those services and the channels you may offer, the features that you bring into those services, the capabilities that support the features, including human capability and human potential, and then the information, data, and maybe the utilities supporting the whole. But then looking at a little bit more into, in between those layers. So who might be standing between your services and your users? So you offer those services to meet the user needs, but maybe some people will interest themselves right there. Then what industry features may steal your show? And instead of going to you, they will go through an industry. And that becomes a platform. What service, software as a service may render your own capabilities pointless. Do you use open source on certain things? Do you still create, a a map, or do you use Google Map, that sort of thing? What new big data is needed for the service? So can you rely only on your data, or do you need to get data from elsewhere? And what commodities may exist to make your service running your service less wasteful? And all those things happen inside your value chains. And actually, that's pretty much where strategy happens, in those gaps. So if we look at the use case of digital success in digital strategy, there's very often an aspect of convenience. Convenience is creating convenience for the users. There's quite a lot of gameplays around intermediation of the service and disintermediation of players. There's platform plays, and the platforms are very often a disintermediation, a willing disintermediation. Of course, there's data play, community plays, exploiting basically a change of landscape, and making and taking advantage of that, looking at adjacent possibilities, and also leveraging a digital core. And for today, I'm really going to focus on the convenience, intermediation, disintermediation, and exploiting the change. So we're going to walk through some use cases and look at the gaps. But before we jump in, I just wanted to make a quick stop and see if there's any questions that you may come into audio or type into the chat. Is everything okay? Good. Let's crack on. So first use case is looking at the convenience element. And here I'm taking a retail use case. So the customers out there for retails, they want to get some goods. And typically they want a variety of choice. And the convenience, which was in the high street, going to your local high street and finding what you need. And that's where the department stores really serve that need. They had inventory, they had things in place to actually serve that level of convenience with a good level of variety. And then e-commerce happens, and the level of variety, became actually a global choice. You could buy from anywhere pretty much with e-commerce. And next, really, with Amazon Prime, which has commoditized e-commerce, you get a doorstep convenience. So it's not anymore going to the high street, it's coming to your doorstep. And e-commerce, more traditional e-commerce players are relying, and it's, upping the game of the courier industry to actually allow them to compete with Amazon. So Amazon has commoditized, set a new standard for doorstep convenience, and the e-commerce are looking to more independent players are looking to work with couriers to actually bring that. And that, in a sense, has redefined and has exploited that gap of variety and convenience, and has redefined that gap around global choice and doorstep convenience. And digital is essentially slotting yourself into that. Now, when I look at that, I'm also thinking, is there something else happening in that gap? What's next? Simon says that, with any sort of end of the curve and commoditization, is the game really stopping there, or is that the point where we're starting to see potentially a new diffusion happening? And what is that new diffusion? So here, who is going to beat Amazon at their game? And Amazon has really certainly consolidated on the logistics aspect. So what new diffusion may happen, and here I'm purely speculating next, is what would be if the new standard is actually intraday? Because Amazon Prime is, in most cases, still something like the next day delivery. And if we were redefining that as being intraday in terms of doorstep convenience, you order something, it will get to you on the day, almost like you order a pizza, to that effect. And you still want a level of variety and choice. So, if you wanted to do that, well, for the variety and choice and the doorstep convenience, you're going to have to have more local logistic centers. And that's that idea of spokes, which would have some hubs that will allow to serve a more global level of choice. So the next level might be to really define hubs and spokes, which Amazon actually already does anyway. But maybe it's an extreme case of going to that. And I'm questioning, whether in that gap there's a further thought around revitalizing the local shops, the local high street, with distributed inventory platforms and an e-commerce on top of that, which actually sort of ties up with some logistics to deliver. So maybe if we exploit that gap here, there may be something where the local shop is actually a reality of e-commerce, as long as all the locals' inventory are actually centralized with an e-commerce on top, where actually the intraday and the new way of thinking about intraday convenience could be served from. So, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's certainly an hypothesis to explore potentially. So again, I'm kind of done with that convenience use case, and I'm wondering if there's any questions you'd like to cover from that first map and use case. Any questions and thoughts in the chat, or please join the audio.
Hello. So what you're talking about here is kind of closely related. So what do you think about the multi-channel development in this in commerce? That's sort of what you're talking about here. or is it related, or how does that sort of relate to these thoughts here?
I did not cover so much the multi-channel on here. It's more the supply side than the channel side.
All right.
Indeed, the global choice, you would have the multi-channel in there in a way that is allowing you to navigate the choices you got, whatever the channel you choose to actually take from.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. I'll move to the next use case in that case, and we should have some time at the end to actually cover more questions. Oh, somebody coming online. Is there an additional question or?
Yes, Phil.
Yes.
So in terms of going back, yes. So we talk about variety and choice. What do you see as being, the requisite, where the requisite variety in terms of where things that logically would be diffused are in a space of overwhelm? Do you have any thoughts on that? Like there's just too much noise.
I think that the answer is going to be depends of the goods. So if you take the books, for instance, the book is maybe you look at a book on a theme, and indeed, if there's too many books, it's overwhelming. But if you look at a book of a particular author, you actually want to have that book accessible to you, and that's what Amazon is giving you. It's the global bookshelf, really. Now, where it's interesting is if you want to serve intraday, and the intraday here is the key thing that may begin changing in the retail element. The intraday with the doorstep convenience, if you want to change that, the value chain underneath has to change quite a bit. And the Amazon model, although it has the urban spokes, might be able, is maybe closer to others to service it, but maybe you need to even go to the whole step of having a distributed inventory of all the local shops, let's say, and which, by the way, is what the food industry is about, except that they make up the goods from the ingredients, so it's not as they need to carry such a stock. But you could very much envisage that when the convenience prevail on the choice, you could have less choice because the selling point is the convenience. So if you think, for instance, a plumber that is on a job and they need a tap, they need some copper pipes, that sort of thing on the job, and they don't have what they need, it doesn't matter necessarily to them so much what the brand is that they get. They just need the supply. So when the good itself is relatively standardized and undifferentiated, you don't need necessarily such variety of choice. And the doorstep convenience will matter more and will be more realizable. So when we talk about coevolution, indeed, there's probably a coevolution of those. And if you want more choice, you may not be able to have as much convenience, and especially pushing that into the intraday. If you're satisfied to live with less choice, we may be able to push the convenience further with evolved model to the Amazon Prime that is the standard right now. And that's what this map is explaining, essentially.
Thank you.
Okay. So, and this is not saying one thing is right or one thing is wrong. This is just showing a landscape. and then we can go about making strategies from that. So let's move to the next use case, because they are similar use cases, and this one is in the food industry. With the very interesting thing in the food industry, if you were taking it in the above, is that things get actually made, and of course they need the ingredients to make something, but different ingredients can be combined in different ways to make something different, or the same ingredients, sorry, can be combined different way to make something different. So an interesting thing around food, and I'm talking about the restaurants and getting food fast or getting fast food. And typically, the value chain, simple value chain has been, you go to your local restaurant, like McDonald's, KFC, and so on, or you go to a drive-through. Generally, those are operated by a franchisee, and that operates under a restaurant chain, a main restaurant chain. And what has happened is the development of platforms like Deliveroo, Uber Eats, and so on, which again has brought a doorstep convenience and to a degree some choices. You're no longer going to your local, you actually have a choice of the locals available to you. And those platforms really use logistics. Logistics of bikes, drivers that deliver the food. Now, what has happened in that industry is COVID has been a really big catalyst. A big catalyst that the doorstep convenience have become really, essential for some people that couldn't go out shopping. And the platform really have moved to something that was maybe just a special clientele to something a lot more mainstream. Now, the interesting thing is when they moved, the whole chain of the restaurant chains and the local restaurant have been commoditized in the process. So effectively, the map looks a lot more like that, where the platforms, bringing that doorstep convenience, the logistics and the choice, have actually disintermediated the brands from their own customers. So if you want on your doorstep, some food, rather than going to your chosen brand, you go to one of those platforms and you choose what you want from there because you're going to get it conveniently delivered. Now, this has disintermediated. So those platforms have intermediated the relationship with the customers and pushed down the restaurant, the franchises, and so on as a commodity. They are using them as a commodity to serve the needs of the customers. So that disintermediation has been a commoditization process for them. Now, when you think in terms of value chains, there's also the flow of capital, the flow of value in there, where those people sit on the most margin, and basically they take most of the margin, and pushing somebody into a commodity means that those people will be left with less margin. Now, the interesting game in there now is finding how do you step up a level on top of them. So, and by the way, this sort of model is exactly the aggregator model of an Airbnb, exactly the aggregator model of the insurance industry, the sort of Go Compare and so on. They are intermediating the relationship with the customers and pushing the providers down as a commodity. Now, in the restaurant industry, what's interesting is, where is the next gap where they can regain that relationship with their customers? And it is really around, playing the brand, playing the CRM, so really the customer relationship, and bringing a digital ordering of their own, where they are actually pushing the platform as the commodity. So if we see, the platform, the logistics, become the commodity offering, that allows them to deliver the food still in the same way, but now they are re-intermediating the relationship with the customers. So, and you will see a lot of those restaurants now offering to take digital orders directly from their sites or their apps, and actually behind the scenes, it is the same platforms that go and deliver, except that the brands have now re-intermediated the relationship. So what's interesting is in here, what you add is the platforms have commoditized the restaurants, and now those restaurants brands are re-intermediated themselves and commoditizing the platforms. But of course, because those platforms were more digital business, they were quicker to react through the pandemics than the more traditional brand can do. So that's pretty much the story here of exploring, in intermediation, exploring the gap. How can we intermediate all the time the relationship with the customer to sit at the top of the value chain, directly serving the needs of the customers? So have you got questions at this point on this use case of intermediation and disintermediation, which I think maps are a fantastic way to represent, by the way?
I have a question, Phil. So what are you seeing where the onboarding, the customer, the education piece on the onboarding, you have to have a more sophisticated customer when you disintermediate? I mean, basically what an intermediary does is make the connections using knowledge that the customer doesn't have. So do you see that piece expanding, contracting, or causing, being a catalyst?
In that case, I'm not so sure that it needs sophistication, although the CRM element needs people to identify themselves. So indeed, you need to be able to have very, very simple mechanisms for people to redeem basically things you may be offering. It feels as well to me here on this map that the branding element will be a critical thing, because the doorstep convenience would be the same, because it's essentially served by the same mechanism anyway. The ordering process, you can make a better experience, but it's going to be marginal. The brand is probably where things are going to play out a lot. The CRM, of course, can play out, but it's if you give coupons and rewards and so on, it's also costing you. The brand may be something really that plays out here to me, in the sense, how can you make your brand cool? How can you make people advocates? How can you sell maybe closing lines and so on with your brand? That makes it fun, that makes it engaging, because essentially here the big difference would be between the choice that a platform can offer. So basically you're going for food, but you don't know if you set for a burger or a pizza or an Indian, whatever it is. Or actually you go to your chosen brand because you have a relationship with them, and any ways that will deepen that relationship, and even emotionally, will be actually potentially making a difference. So it's going to be a play really between the choice and the brand, and the more those restaurant chain can play on their brand and make their brand cool and make advocates and people really buying into them as a lifestyle, it will probably be where it plays out. And that's only my opinion, by the way. Nothing is certainty in there.
I think that may be true in common products and in B2C, but I guess I'm thinking in terms of B2B, where especially the technology market, is moving more to outcome selling, and not productized. And even Amazon is moving more toward selling services, putting people on the platform. If you look on the back end of Amazon, they're now starting to create platforms for services as much as products.
But here we're talking about a use case about fast food industry, right?
I'm just looking at it from a strategic point of view and disintermediary, in terms of what is going to be food would be, for example, someone who's not looking for whether they want a burger or Mexican, but whether they want to eat healthy. They're moving more toward the packaging, where people are packaging up a week's meal for them to cook. So that's disintermediating. That's a displacing the meal for the health, the experience, the outcome. So just a thought.
We will have to map that. I'm not sure how this map will capture it. But if I look at the questions in the chat, they're all restaurants. So I think there are restaurants being set up to serve customer completely through this channel, kitchen only. So yes, they're all restaurants, but they're all really at the bottom of the chain here, which would be fairly transparent to customers, where it will be the meals will be picked up from there, but what the customer knows about that is very little. They wouldn't be able to show up to those restaurants or those kitchens. CRM for this ought to be product very soon. And by CRM, I mean customer relationship management. Yes, it will rely on some industry products. Why is it in custom? Is because you need to figure how do you tailor that relationship? How do you make it feel to the customers that it's custom and unique to them? So the idea of CRM as a concept and a customer engagement, that's why I put it into custom. But indeed, it would be served in terms of technology by more traditional products and so on. I hope I'm answering your question, Johan, here. In the brand, you had another question. Should the brand be more to the left? Maybe it can be, but a brand is a product. So the perspective I took here is really make it special, but on that boundary between a product and a custom. The idea that, and especially in the food industry, the brands have to be seen as it's a repeatable experience where you know what you're going to get. And especially for that type of food, you go back because you're not disappointed. You get that experience again. So that's why it's on that fringe about having that excitement about being special, but at the same time, it's a repeatable in terms of products. That's why I made that choice. Productized CRM using some kind of digital identity across brand. That could be the idea of being a cross brand is where you start having this sort of aggregator effect, which is what the Deliveroo's and so on are doing. And it's not as clear cut. So it's a convenience you bring. That is maybe an ordering convenience and so on that is not represented on that map. But it's more difficult to have a branding effect when you have different brands. Anyway, that's what I think. Yeah, I'm not a branding specialist, but next question, Felix. How do you decide exactly things are on the map. For instance, why is brand more to the right than CRM? I hope I answered that question with my 2 previous comments. And it's not getting it right, it's being able to discuss it. So those are judgment call you're making, and there's the cheat sheet that allows you to actually clarify those choices. And the most important part of it is to make those choices together, to map together, so that people build that common understanding. What are we calling with this thing and why it is there? And they will have a healthy debate about where to position it. So I'm not saying, that's why CRM has to be there and brand has to be there, but those are what I thought about when I was doing it. If there was many of you with me, we would have discussed it, and maybe the order would have been different, and maybe our meaning behind those words would have been different as well, or at least clarified. Kevin Skelly's idea. So Lee, I'm reminded of Kevin Skelly's idea of having 1,000 true fans as a benchmark. Yes, and that's what I was talking about. Although some brands I think would want to have more than 1,000, but that is and I'm seeing in that industry at the moment some merchandising coming out. And I was actually talking to somebody in that industry today and saying, I was doing that map, and the branding element, really, you need to think about merchandising. And he was saying, actually, we're already launching something in partnership with so-and-so. So that was a good, interesting validation of what I was putting on that map. Then Johan, next questions. Got this. Many questions. I'm not necessarily able to address them all. I look at the next one, and I'll move to the next use case, and then we can have a bit of a wrap up. I agree. Digital ordering also feels like something you can buy off the shelf, depending on definitions, of course. And yes, the technology you can buy off the shelf, but creating the experience is something that at the moment those are custom building in a way. Now, I'm not really representing the details or the below value chains where you may be using, things, and I don't want to advertise anything, but Shopify or things like that. Maybe products you would feel even in the commodity space, and they could build on that. But the idea of creating a new channel or something that didn't have that allow the digital ordering from their platform is custom, and as soon as it will be done, it will probably move into a more product or something like that. So I'm going to move to the next use case. For the questions that I haven't dealt with, please hold on to them, and let's open up for those questions at the end. So next use case is exploiting the landscape change. And for this, I'm going to take an idea of a fashion, fashion customers and fashion, selling fashion clothes. And I'm not a fashionista, by the way, so I may get things wrong, but it's for the sake of presenting a view here. So fashion customers, are certainly attracted, I believe, in designs, in having a great fitting of what you're buying. There's probably labels and having designer clothes and so on. The convenience and the experience of shopping, and probably some good prices. Everybody quite likes a bargain. And if we look below that, the high street is certainly supporting the great fitting, in the sense that you can go in the shop and try things for yourselves. And there's that convenience and experience, but you got to go to the high street. And e-commerce have brought that to the doorstep, as we said before. And maybe there's more shopping around with it for good prices. But equally, the great fitting. So there's a lot of things that may sit into that dotted line around helping with finding the right sizing when you shop without trying. And that is a big challenge in the e-com industry, because people tend to order multiple sizes and return those sizes afterwards to get only the right one. which has a really big cost. So that's why it's a dotted line at the moment, because we are trying, but it's difficult, of course. Then if I go further, the high street shopping and the convenience, which are packaged with experience, it may become a social thing, something you do. It's almost combining the aspect of shopping for the goods as well as doing it for entertainment. And of course, the designs, the labels, and so on are here to have a selection. And if we think about good prices, it's linked with the logistics of distribution, and also quite a lot of the manufacturing costs have gone low-cost labor, but that has implications. And if we look the below implication to actually get things done remotely, is that you need to have good sales predictions, and you need to carry an inventory. And of course, that inventory bears on your cost and your ability to do good prices, and you have the shipping cost as well. And all of this is getting very imbalanced at the moment, because we don't know what's going to come of the economy for the predictions. The shipping costs are going very high, and the latencies and the delays are pretty significant. And in fashion business, if you get your container in September for the summer fashion, you have pretty much something you can't sell anymore. So all this is interesting, that in fashion retailing, a large part of the success is in that lower part of the value chain. And we see the fashion, we see the fancy websites and so on, but actually where the money will be made by them is between those predictions and the ability to carry the inventory that is adequate. Now, if we think, what is happening in that space here? And, I remind, the talk is about looking into the gaps to see what we can actually envisage. So what is happening in that space? Why is that space empty? And here I'm going to stretch a little bit into the future to cover what it could be. So if we think about one day, we may be able to 3D print clothes. And it may not be the 3D printers with plastic wire that we have today, maybe something more sophisticated. But if we, for argument's sake, just think we may be able to 3D print clothes. And you may have basically a local factory machine that 3D prints locally to you, and you get orders delivered from that. So essentially, we're saying clothes may become software. And I just let that sink in. And and a step beyond is actually, even if you could home print, so you will have a printer type thing that can actually, you buy a design online, and that can print your trousers, your dress, whatever it is, at home or in a local high street. So that would be pretty game changer. And if you look, even something else here is, from the social element, you could have, like social influencers today, you could have social designers that would design clothes, and they would be basically selling software. They wouldn't have to do all the rest. They would just have to sell software, like a pattern or something that will make the clothes. And actually, that makes a case for NFTs here, potentially. I'm a bit cynical about NFTs, but in that case, they could sell, there would be only 1,000 of them made. They could sell this unique piece here, and people could buy that. And the NFT would control how many times that thing can be printed. So if we look into that gap, if that gap becomes real one day, it is all the underpinning of retail as we know it today that completely gets changed. And the fundamental idea around effectiveness or efficiency is, in lean, inventory is a waste. And essentially the whole clothing fashion industry needs to be built on inventory. and predicting what inventory you need for the next season. If you can print on demand, the whole logistic value chain doesn't matter anymore. So, this may be a bit far-fetched, a bit futuristic, but nonetheless, it's a very seismic change to this industry if that was to realize. And if I was in this industry, I couldn't ignore that. I would look at keeping tabs of what can be going on to actually facilitate local production and reduce inventory with modern technologies. So that is probably a little bit controversial as a use case, but again, I invite comments, and if you wanted to say what this is actually calling out for you on this specific thing, or if it makes you think about a different industry and different situation, please put some light on the context so we're clear what this is about. Questions? Is everybody still thinking? Please join the video audio if you would like to ask. Printing food could be cool as well. Well, it will certainly change the supply chain, and I think they're going to have to do something like that if they want to travel in space. But a very thought-provoking example. Yeah, thank you for that. It's actually, that example may be a bit far-fetched, but I'm using those sort of things. Looking, people talk about scenario mapping, and as Simon often says, they're doing maps that aren't maps. But you can use Wardley Maps for scenario mapping by looking at what is your value chains and how it's set up like that, and introducing new technologies and seeing how they disrupt your overall map. And then it tells you, if you look as well as, Simon publishes a view of how new technologies are going to unfold and within how many years they become actually mainstream. So if you work backwards from that, it gives you kind of a time frame for whatever alternative part of your value chain has been created using those new technologies in your business. And you can say, well, going from the left to going to the right, the prediction is this technology will be mainstream in 5 years' time. We have 5 years to transform our business from that footprint to this footprint. So the footprint to the left will replace the footprint to the right when those technology will become mainstream. It's a very, interesting way of taking the maps, the idea of scenario mapping using maps, and actually the sort of view of the future Simon publishes in terms of those technology becoming mainstream, putting basically a time frame on your map and giving you a vector of change. So you have what the change should be, and you have the time frame for it to happen. Then you can actually look at the change program. So seems like there are a few industries that could have inventory disrupted by hyperlocalization. Indeed, and especially if technology is able to sort of 3D print everything, it feels like a lot of traditional business relying on inventory suddenly will see things changing. And those changes were absolutely core in the lean industry. I mean, in the lean thinking in terms of reducing inventory. And a lot of car manufacturing is actually based on having local production, local suppliers, so it can be all a just-in-time chain. We could see that in a lot of industry, especially as labor cost is going higher, as the sort of emerging economies are becoming more mature, and therefore there's less options for low cost, and the shipping is actually becoming also much more expensive, and that's probably not about to change. So the economics of the lower part of the value chain could actually accelerate and become a catalyst for whatever is on the left to replace what's on the right. And that's why you do maps, is to have that insight and starting to see how it unfolds. At the very least, what we have on the left here, even if it's a bit far-fetched, it should be indicating what are the weak signals we should monitor to tell us how is this unfolding, and how far do we need to experiment with it, how far do we need to watch it, and when do we need to start playing into it, that sort of thing. Mapping for scenario discovery. And indeed, I made a comment earlier actually that the maps add an element of serendipity that the canvases were not really offering. And I believe that in scenario planning, your point is spot on here. The maps allow you to have scenario discovery because you have that serendipity in the map, as long as it's approached in the right way. I think also the upper middle part will change massively. And yes, probably. The interesting thing would be that relationship between social designers and labels, and whether labels can exist or they would be weakened by social designs, and that would probably be so much faster in terms of emerging sort of new designers and them being emerging and being replaced by others, and the labels that have been standing for something traditional for so many years, maybe they become challenged by that. So it's a good point, how those two would be in relationship is interesting. High street, labels, price, e-commerce will all get different. Even Amazon would be disrupted. And yes, it's funny you're saying that in your question, because part of what I was looking at for some time was, I work on the retail research group with Simon. Part of what I was looking at is how is Amazon going to get unsettled eventually? And given that Amazon is really, really strong on the logistics element, I'm wondering if this could unsettle Amazon when the logistic is not the primary thing anymore, or such relevance. The big thing, however, it's most likely that Amazon will be way ahead of more traditional players in reading that landscape and in using technologies in that fashion. So I'm not sure it will unsettle them so much, because they will probably ride the evolution. But on the other hand, yes, that will certainly completely change their business model. So that's pretty much it. Thank you very much, and I hope this fun topic of minding the gaps allows you to think about what are we seeing on the map, but what it is, where have we got gaps, what it is that will fill those gaps, and start looking into them and spot gaps, or imaginary gaps in maps that you go and fill to actually find strategic treasures in there. I think we have another 5 minutes, so if anybody wants to ask questions on audio or share some thoughts, you're most welcome to do that. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you, Piotr. Thank you, Joachim, Felix, and Thomas, Johannes. CV as map. I've done actually some talks around that, and that's a topic I'm looking to explore more. So if you want to catch up with me, so XY, I've done a lot of work on that, and I'm looking to do another cycle of it. The idea of a CV as a map is growing on me, very much around creating awareness around your development areas and where you're positioned. And I'm doing that mostly from the question of entering a coaching relationship with a coachee, allowing them to draw their own map and understand what they need to develop, and how to gain from the coaching as a result. So what to bring as an agenda to coaching. So if you wanted to explore that, I'm actually looking to work with a few people to map themselves and map their CV, and from there on, figuring out if it gives you an insight about your development areas. Thank you all. I think we're gonna close it now. It's just about on time. I wish you a great rest of the session, and feel free to reach out on my Twitter or on this conference if you have questions. I love to great thought-provoking. That's what I try and do. So thank you. Have a good one all. Thank you.